Joining me right here on the front of everything that we just laid out for the NFL on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line is my colleague from the NFL Media Group, who's just been fantastic covering everything in this crazy mixed-up NFL world. He is Tom Pelissero. How you doing, Tom?
Slightly calmer than I was 1 week ago at this time, but we're not done yet, Rich.
I bet. I know there's still so many guys out there, but I still haven't turned the page, as they say in our business. How did the Browns get back in on Watson? Was it born out of Mayfield saying I want out, and they decided, well, one way to move on then and get out of all this is to get Watson anyway?
The Browns gave Deshaun Watson 230 million reasons to choose Cleveland, fully guaranteed. They were told they were out on Thursday morning. They came back later on that day. I was told by somebody involved in the situation that when Deshaun Watson went to bed on Thursday night, there was maybe a 10% chance that he was going to be a Brown. But he woke up and continued to think on the roster, on the general manager, Andrew Berry, who had been so aggressive pursuing him, on the owner, Jimmy Haslam, who really impressed him with his knowledge of the football operation. And then there was the contract. I mean, Rich, this is not just within the context of Deshaun Watson and the serious allegations of sexual misconduct that he continues to face in 22 civil lawsuits and NFL investigation that could lead to a suspension, even though he was not criminally charged. This is a unprecedented contract in every way, so much so that when I was talking to general managers and other front office people, and people were reaching out directly to me, obviously there's a lot involved with the Watson situation, and there were various reasons the other teams involved were not willing to do a contract like this. But at a very base level, contracts like this don't exist in the NFL. And so somebody I respect very much in the league told me they just changed the entire landscape of the economics of the NFL, because all of a sudden it's a 5-year guarantee, $230 million, which means that not only does Watson get paid $46 million this year, but Jimmy Haslam has to put a $184 million check into escrow by next March 31st to cover the remaining guarantees. Teams don't do that. And now for everybody who's got a franchise quarterback coming up, whether it is Lamar Jackson, who is in the midst of talks, whether it's guys like Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, who are going to be coming up soon, Kyler Murray, who wants and expects a contract ASAP from the Cardinals, this is the new benchmark, and it's so far beyond any other deal we've seen in terms of guaranteed money that this has the possibility to be an inflection point, and we'll see. Obviously not everyone's going to have the leverage from a football perspective that Deshaun Watson did, but we'll see how this now has an impact on future contracts, because there's a lot of teams that aren't happy about this. Well,
you're right to say leverage from a football perspective, because Watson had no leverage from an outside of football perspective, and I'm sure that's what prospective agents are going to be saying, about Justin Herbert and, or anybody else, Burrow coming up, assuming, they don't have any off the field, issues that garner an absurd number of civil lawsuits that's filed against him. So why did the Browns, what due diligence, best you can tell, did the Browns do on Watson where they felt comfortable doing this, knowing that they'd have to sell it to a fan base and knowing that Watson will have to do that personally at some point as well?
I would say, broadly speaking, the teams involved in Deshaun Watson trade talks did extensive background work. Some of them hired private investigators to go to Houston, certainly getting in touch with various people involved with the legal process. And obviously the attorney representing the 22 women in the civil lawsuit says that he was not reached out to, nor were his clients. But there was substantial digging that went into this, reference work. And listen, I certainly understand the sensitivity of the matter and the concerns that a lot of people have about the totality of this, particularly when you're fully guaranteeing someone $230 million and indemnifying them against having to give that up if eventually Deshaun Watson is suspended by the league. But teams, you aren't putting this type of capital and this type of contract forward if you do not have a level of confidence, not certainty, but confidence that there are not going to be further allegations that behavior, that decision-making is going to change, and that Deshaun Watson realizes that he's going to need to be completely on the straight and narrow and, reestablish himself, as they said in their statements, in the community. Again, I understand that that's not going to be enough for plenty of people, and I'm sensitive to that. And I think that the Browns understand what they were dealing with here. But, again, what is the goal of NFL teams? It's not to have 90 of the perfect citizens. It's to win football games. Like it or not, that's their job, is to win football games and make money. Deshaun Watson can help the Browns do both those things, and they were willing to take all the risk on that Houston had been carrying over the past 14 months by keeping him on the roster. That now transfers to Cleveland.
So, Tom, tell me, what is Watson's camp telling you, right? Because we have not heard publicly from Deshaun Watson outside of an occasional, social media post at all. And so, the void is filled with people who feel outraged that somebody who has these civil lawsuits hanging over him gets this sort of guaranteed money before they even hear from him as to why he deserves it, or why, it's deserving to think he's turned a corner, or everything that has been said about him is false. So what are they saying about all of this from what you hear, Tom?
I would say, for the same reason that Deshaun Watson invoked the Fifth Amendment in his civil deposition that came on the same day that the grand jury was hearing the district attorney's findings on the criminal side, it is unlikely that Deshaun Watson is going to make substantive statements regarding his actions, regarding any alleged incidents, regarding anything, really, prior to those civil cases also being resolved. Now, part of the reason that Watson and his camp have made clear that he was not willing to settle across the board, reach a global settlement prior to this on the civil side, was that he wanted to not have non-disclosure agreements. In
Right.
other words, he wanted to be able to comment publicly, and in turn, all the women would also be able to comment publicly, which is the opposite of how this normally goes. So I would anticipate there's going to be a point in time where you are going to hear from Deshaun Watson, where he is going to go on the offensive, as he may have or may not have, we don't know, in the most recent deposition when he did not invoke the Fifth Amendment. So it's complicated on so many levels, just because you also have the NFL investigation. The NFL has spoken with a certain number, I don't know the precise number, but they have spoken with multiple women who were involved in the cases. Now that the criminal side of things are closed, that's when the NFL, based on its investigatory process, gathers more information, because they don't want to interfere in any criminal investigations. But so evidence, whatever it might be, that the NFL now is trying to get that into their hands. And their disciplinary decision is going to be on a different standard under the personal conduct policy. So one side of this, with the grand jury not criminally charging Deshaun Watson, obviously is over for now. But the civil suits, the NFL investigation, those are still moving. And so it doesn't really benefit Deshaun Watson to say a great deal publicly right now, particularly when, amidst, as you mentioned, Rich, the relative silence that he's had for a long period of time, came out with him on the other side, going a place where he gets to play with a really good team and make $230 million fully guaranteed over the next 5 years.
Tom Pelissero, NFL Media Group, colleague of mine right here on the Rich Eisen Show. What about Baker now? Let's talk about the plan for him before we get to some other teams' plan Bs now that they've lost out on Watson. What do you got for me on Baker?
Well, Baker wanted a fresh start, and he is now going to get it. The complicating factors are you've got a player who's fully guaranteed over $18.8 million next season, and is coming off a season where he was really hurt. He played hurt the entire season and didn't play nearly to the level that he had back in 2020 when the Browns went to the playoffs and won their first playoff game in 26 years. This may be a situation where the Browns need to eat some money in order to get value. It sounds like the price, at least out of the gate, was roughly what the 49ers wanted for Jimmy Garoppolo, what the Falcons initially wanted for Matt Ryan. Most of these guys, the price starts out as a second-round pick and an additional pick. I find it hard to believe, not impossible, but hard to believe that the Browns are going to get that price, because also the entire league knows that they have to trade Baker Mayfield, that there's no path forward for him on the roster at this point. It's an interesting spot because early on, I think in this offseason, it was a seller's market when you looked at the names and the vacancies. Now you can argue it's a buyer's market, because for a team like the Colts, Garoppolo's got to go somewhere. Matt Ryan may have to go somewhere. Baker Mayfield definitely has to go somewhere. Marcus Mariota is still looking for a job. Andy Dalton is looking for a job. Jameis Winston, in all likelihood, will end up back in New Orleans, but for the moment, he remains a free agent. You don't need to jump out and get the one guy. There's a bunch of people available, and meanwhile, these teams are looking at the selling teams are looking at the vacancies and seeing fewer and fewer. They may become more motivated to deal somebody sooner than later. So where Baker ends up, that's to be determined. I know that he would like to end up with the Colts, but the Colts have, as I mentioned, a variety of different options on the table. I'll be fascinated to see where Baker lands and how he plays, because, again, we got the best of Baker Mayfield in 2020. Last year was plainly not his best, and he was playing through multiple significant injuries. Where his career goes from here, all I know is Baker Mayfield has always played his best when he feels like he's been slighted, when he's got that edge and that chip on his shoulder, and he absolutely is going to have it now, Rich.
So is Seattle in on this at all?
Seattle's in an interesting spot because they traded for a quarterback, or received a quarterback in the Russell Wilson trade, who they liked a lot coming out. Drew Lock, he's really athletic and he's tall and he's got a cannon arm. Has been inconsistent, but was playing in an offense that probably was not best suited to his strengths or the strengths of the players around him in Denver. So they envision him at least competing for the job, but John Schneider, the general manager in Seattle, is in on, one of those guys who's always going to be in on every deal. Absolutely. I think that another quarterback trade would not surprise me. Drafting a quarterback would not surprise me. I think that they'll be talking to everyone. You probably have your doubts about whether or not the 49ers would trade Jimmy Garoppolo within the division, but virtually everything else, I would anticipate Seattle is examining everything, because there's not a firm starter there. Fair to say it. They like Drew Lock. They think he can develop. They are interested to see him compete for the job, but if something else presents itself, I wouldn't think that would stop John Schneider or Pete Carroll from doing what they want to do.
A few minutes left with Tom Pelissero, my colleague from NFL Network, NFL Media Group, here on the Rich Eisen Show. So you referenced Matt Ryan moments ago. What is the deal with him? That's the opener. Let me put a couple more meat on the bone here, because the difference between him and Baker Mayfield is there's many of them. He didn't send out a message to Atlanta, even though this is the second straight year the Falcons were kicking tires, either on a 4th overall selection to replace him or Deshaun Watson. And so what's going on with him, with a roster bonus, money, and the feasibility of him staying, or the cost of him leaving? What's the deal with Matt Ryan?
Well, the Falcons have been having trade talks involving Matt Ryan since before they found out that they were out on Deshaun Watson, and there certainly was a point in time where the Falcons thought that Watson was going to be coming to Atlanta. There have been multiple teams engaged, the Colts being a significant one, that have been talking for several days now. You have to get to a price point. You also have to work something out contract-wise, because Matt Ryan's got 2 years, $54 million left, no guaranteed money. He changed agents recently. You would anticipate that a contract would need to be a part of any deal. But Matt Ryan's in a spot where, he's been the quarterback for 14 years in Atlanta. He's won an MVP, and here the Falcons are going after somebody else. It certainly casts doubt on his future. It does not sound like Matt Ryan was particularly pleased. The team did loop him in, but he was not pleased about those trade talks with Watson. And so exploring other things, including a potential landing in Indianapolis, makes perfect sense.
Okay. And the plan B you mentioned for the Saints is Jameis? That's the plan B for the Saints?
It certainly sounds that way. I wouldn't take anything off the table. They still have Taysom Hill. They have Ian Booker they drafted last year. But, if Jameis is going to land one spot and have a chance to start, New Orleans is it.
And what about Carolina? What's their plan B, Tom?
With Carolina, they still got Sam Darnold, who's fully guaranteed like $18 million this season. So that's your starting point. They were in hard on Deshaun Watson for a year and a half, going all the way back to last year. They made about 5 or 6 different pushes. Were not able to, make a deal for him. So, again, they're a team that's in a position of you've already got one quarterback who you're paying money to. Do you add a second? They don't have a ton of picks because of all the trades they've made. Do you put out additional draft capital, or are you better off with a Marcus Mariota? They were really hopeful that they were going to be able to land Deshaun Watson. It didn't happen, and so they're kind of another team that's resetting here and figuring out what they want to do.
And let's say if the Colts are successful in getting Matt Ryan, right, then what would the Falcons' plan be? Would they go for Baker? Is it possible Baker winds up without a starting seat this year if the Colts go with Matt Ryan? Do you think, Tom?
It's definitely possible. I mean, because you just don't have that many starting spots left. That's always the issue when you're talking about quarterbacks who become available at this time of year. Now, I would think what Baker wants is to go someplace where he at least has a chance to compete, and I would not think anybody is taking on $18.8 million to have him not be the starter. Again, if the Browns eat a good chunk of that, could they get some value and Baker goes someplace where it's not a clear starting job? That's definitely possible too. There's a bunch of guys. I mean, look at the number of high picks we're talking about here. Baker was the number 1 overall pick. Jameis was the number 1. Marcus Mariota was number 2. Cam Newton was a number 1 overall pick, who we haven't even mentioned and is probably not going to be starting somewhere, but could easily be within the league this year. Matt Ryan was a number 3 overall pick. I mean, that's a lot of, we're talking about prime names and prime quarterbacks here, and there's just not going to be a spot for all of them to be starting in the NFL.
Tom, you're the man. Great work. Thanks again. Look for my call. I'd love to have you on again. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Love to do it, Rich. Thanks.
You got it. At Tom Pelissero. You should follow him. I do. It's been dynamite. Dynamite. Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.